Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto. And
No, not yet, Marcelo. Wait a little. So we have people to enter.
Okay. I thought we were going. You let me know.
Yes, people are coming, so they are all coming right now.
You just say allez. I'll briefly introduce us.
So Marcelo, I think we can start.
Okay. Well, thank you, merci. And I want to personally thank, on behalf of the team, the Cooperation Virtual Institutes and Canadian Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada, as well as ACE, for the opportunity to be sharing with you our research. My name is Marcelo Vieta, and I'm an associate professor at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto, and I am the project lead of the Conversion to Cooperatives Project, or Co-op-Convert. And today I am I'm presenting on the key findings and highlights so far of our research around conversions to cooperatives, together with Fiona Duguid, who's adjunct professor at Cape Breton University, as well as other things, and also a co-lead on the project, and José Charbonneau, who is a research professional at Ida Coos University of Sherbrooke and is researching also with us on the project. So today our webinar is called Another Way to Form Cooperatives. How about business conversions to cooperatives? So we have a full presentation today, and we hope to cover our kind of multi-pronged research. Our research is kind of complex in a way, looking at conversions to cooperatives in Canada. So the overview for today is, I want to just overview the project briefly, and I'll share this initial presentation, the initial introduction with Fiona. Then we will share with you the business conversion to cooperative database that we're putting together, report on key findings from our small and medium-sized enterprise owner survey on succession, share with you some exemplar cases of conversions to cooperatives in Canada, then kind of talk about typology, kind of start to summarize our research by talking about a possible typology of conversions to cooperatives. We might call them BCCs, that's what we mean, business conversions to cooperatives. And then emerging partnerships and future expectations for our project. So an overview of our project. What is our project? How did we get going? What motivated it? Well, our project is a partnership. It's a partnership development grant funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. It started in 2018 and is now in year 3. And it's a partnership between the University of Toronto and the University of Sherbrooke, so 2 universities, and our community partner is Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada. As well, we are working with other partners in the cooperative sector that we've joined up with since starting the project, such as the Canadian Worker Cooperative Federation, Cooperatives First, and other provincial associations as well. What are the motivations for our project? What got us motivated to look at conversions to cooperatives in Canada? Well, there are 1.16 million employer SMEs in Canada, that's small and medium-sized enterprises. Of them, 500,000 are boomers that are planning to retire in the coming years. And we found, early on, we found out that only 9 to 25%, we don't really know how many, but not many of them have succession plans. And around 20% of all SMEs in Canada are going to be closing directly related to the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is just something that emerged in year 2 of our project as the pandemic was unfolding. So collectively, this is going to affect thousands of jobs if we consider that about 90% of employment in Canada is in small and medium-sized enterprises. So we're proposing that conversions to cooperatives can be a viable solution to these 2 crises, and also as a way of creating new cooperatives. And so what we're looking at is, what are the enabling environments? What has happened in Canada so far around conversions? This is not a new thing. They've been happening for a long time, but there are not many of them. How come? Why is it that an infrastructure does exist in Canada for conversions, but this mostly falls under the radar for small and medium-sized enterprises and policymakers as well? So I'll pass it on to Fiona, who will talk about our 2 objectives for the study.
Thanks, Marcelo. So we have 2 big objectives. The first one is around, as Marcelo has said, around enabling and identifying the enabling environments for business conversion to co-ops in Canada. And because this is a project that involves both community and researchers, we have got a really dynamic process of mixed methods approach. Marcelo has already sort of highlighted some of the outcomes that we're working towards. The international scan, really developing out a data set of the current conversions that have happened in Canada. He mentioned also already the survey of retiring SME owners. And then working with key stakeholders and key informants for interviews, just to really get that on the ground, what happens in this moment. And then, as Jose and I are going to present a little later on, some embedded and contextual case studies. The second one is also around, okay, what do we do with all this information once we've got it? And one of our hopes and intents, especially given that it is, as I said, a research and community-based project, is to help to build out the capacity with CMC and other sector, co-op sector organizations, so that it can be really grounded in empirical research, and as well as really around sharing those learnings for what has happened in the past and how we can sort of look into the future, and how we can work to help build out the capacity of different organizations and individuals who are looking to this as a potential stream for how people can move forward in their communities and for their businesses.
Great. And this research is building on other international research that I've been involved in, that I've led, in particular in Italy, studying worker buyouts, which is a model that's informing our research as well as Argentina's worker recuperated enterprises. And that just, my findings from a 15-year study of conversions to cooperatives in Argentina just came out in a book from Brill, and there's a link to it if you're interested. So it's building already on work that's been done around conversions to cooperatives. I want to preface this before we get into the findings that we found in our research, and in my research, there's 3 types of conversions. Converting some productive entity into a cooperative. They tend to happen in 3 ways. The first one is what we call a labor conflict conversion. This is where there is a conflict on shop floors. Usually the workers are in conflict or with the owners, and there's a threat of closure of the firm. Usually these are firms that are bankrupt or nearing bankruptcy, or other kind of shady business dealings have been going on. So workers take them over in a moment of conflict and convert them to cooperatives. This tends to happen in places, and not surprisingly, where the neoliberal model has taken on a really sharp turn and affected working people in workplaces like Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay in particular. The second type are negotiated conversions. And these are where there's an established kind of enabling environment, as we're saying, legislation, processes, and knowledge about how to convert a firm to a co-op. They tend to happen around succession issues. And this is what we've seen mainly in Quebec and the rest of Canada, but also in Italy and France. And then thirdly are partial conversions. These are conversions of firms into cooperatives where either the workers or the employees don't have ownership, but they have decision-making, or they don't have they don't have decision-making rights, but they have ownership rights. For example, an ESOP, an employee share ownership plan, that converts into a cooperative, and there are cases of that, would be this case. And there's also cases like this in Canada that we are considering as part of our universe of conversions that Jose will talk about in a minute. These are worker shareholder cooperatives, for example. And there are other types of conversions that sometimes they become cooperatives and sometimes they don't. So what we're asking is, what is the Canadian model? And we're going to suggest that it's a negotiated model, but that it's not well known. And part of our part of the outcomes of our project is to make it better known as well. So I'll pass it on to Jose, who will be talking about our database and some of the key highlights of our business conversion to cooperative database.
Thanks, Marcello. OK, donc de mon côté, je vais parler en français. Alors, on fait un petit détour vers un autre langage pour discuter donc un peu de la banque de données. C'est une banque de données qu'on constitue depuis le début de la recherche qui vise à recenser les cas de conversion en coopérative qu'on connaît actuellement. Donc, on en est à l'élaboration. C'est un travail continu, ce qui fait qu'au fur et à mesure qu'on apprend de nouvelles conversions, on la joint à notre banque de données. Jusqu'à maintenant, on a recensé environ 188 cas de conversion coopérative au Canada. Et comme vous pouvez le voir sur le graphique sur la droite, près de 148 actuellement parmi celles qu'on a dénombrées proviennent du Québec. Donc, c'est un phénomène beaucoup plus répandu ici au Québec qu'ailleurs au Canada. Et sur la gauche, on voit aussi que certaines conversions ont lieu depuis quand même plusieurs années. Marcello? Oh, yeah. Good. Donc, sommairement, pour le moment, ce qu'on a comme observation en termes de type de coopérative, en fait de conversion coopérative, les types de coopératives adoptés par les nouvelles coopératives sont, pour la plupart, la plus grande majorité pour l'instant, ce qu'on trouve, ce sont des coopératives de consommateurs. Donc, les membres sont les consommateurs de la coopérative. Par la suite, une des formes de conversion les plus répandues est aussi celle des coopératives de travailleurs, ce qui revient un peu à la reprise, justement, d'une entreprise dans laquelle les personnes travaillent, ils reprennent l'entreprise pour laquelle ils travaillent et en font une coopérative de travailleurs. Une des variantes de la coopérative de travailleurs est la coopérative de travailleurs actionnaires, qu'on trouve quand même en un certain nombre au Québec, ce qui correspond en fait à une conversion partielle, une transmission partielle, un peu ce que Marcello mentionnait tout à l'heure, c'est-à-dire qu'une partie des droits de propriété sont transférés en fait aux travailleurs. Et la coopérative de travailleurs en elle-même devient actionnaire de l'entreprise pour laquelle les travailleurs travaillent, en fait, au sein de laquelle les travailleurs travaillent. Donc, on aura un exemple très bref tout à l'heure sur un cas de coopérative de travailleurs actionnaires qui est devenu une coopérative de travailleurs par la suite. Et enfin, un des types de coopératives qui arrive le plus, c'est les coopératives de solidarité, ce qui ressemble un peu aux multi-stakeholder cooperatives, donc dans le reste du Canada, c'est-à-dire que plusieurs types de membres forment la coopérative, que ce soit des consommateurs, des travailleurs, des producteurs ou même des membres de la communauté, donc qui deviennent membres à part entière de la coopérative pour reprendre une entreprise. Pour ce qui est donc des secteurs des coopératives, ce qu'on voit le plus actuellement, parce qu'il y a eu, on y reviendra aussi tout à l'heure, actuellement, ce qu'on voit le plus, ce sont des coopératives funéraires qui sont transformées, en fait, des entreprises funéraires qui sont rachetées et ou transformées en coopératives. Et on voit aussi que les services professionnels et techniques prennent une place, somme toute importante, de même que les épiceries et autres services de proximité, en fait, qui sont souvent reprises par la communauté. Donc, pour le moment, on a un portrait qui donne une idée que les conversions coopératives peuvent se produire dans une multitude de secteurs.
Merci, José. And now I'd like to present some key findings from our recently completed survey of small and medium-sized business owners or business owners that are owners of small and medium-sized firms in Canada, to see what their succession plans are and how much or how little they know about the cooperative possibility. We conducted this survey in January and February of 2020. It's the first survey of its kind in Canada. We worked with a research firm called Modus Research, who has developed a representative business panel. And we managed to survey 319 near-retirement SME business owners across Canada. Again, I like to emphasize it's the first time this has been done around this issue of conversion and of succession and potentially conversion to Canada, to a cooperative in Canada. The panel was weighted to the population of each province. So each province was fairly represented, depending on the population and also the population of businesses as well. It represents a broad cross-section of economic sectors and businesses, with mostly small businesses and a smaller, most of them were small businesses, as Canada's businesses tend to be mostly small businesses. And then the second most numerous are medium-sized businesses. So we're talking businesses under 500, small businesses being under 50. So what we initially discovered is, and perhaps not surprisingly, is that there is a low propensity to convert to co-op for succession. That's under our current knowledge situation. That's primarily because most people don't know about, or most small and medium-sized business owners don't know about cooperatives or don't understand them properly. So here you see only 5% of our sample were very likely to convert to a cooperative, and 18% were somewhat. So these 23% of cooperatives are the ones that are currently the most attuned kind of audience for conversions to cooperatives. So one recommendation we would have is to target this type of this audience base of SMEs who do know about cooperatives, in order to conduct conversions, and that could respond to succession issues most readily. But as we can see, 72% of Canadian SMEs aren't aware, business owners aren't aware of this model for succession and for saving businesses, perhaps. Sorry, I missed a slide here. What are the attitudes towards themes related to succession and familiarity with co-ops in Canada? Well, like I said, few are few SME owners are familiar with co-ops and their strengths, and few understand what a co-op is. So co-ops, for example, in deeper questions we ask them, are perceived to be inefficient and uncompetitive by many SME owners, at least the ones that know something about co-ops. So they don't know much about co-ops, because actually co-ops can be very efficient and actually very competitive, as we know. But almost 3/4 believe that granting equity ownership improves employee loyalty. We're looking at this as a possible proxy, that if more SME owners know about the cooperative solution to succession and for businesses at risk, perhaps there is a more avid and active audience base amongst SME owners that could consider a cooperative should they know more about, would they know more about what a co-op is. So of those 23%, or of the 5% that were very likely to convert to a co-op for succession, they highlighted various reasons why they would. And again, this is where we can start to structure, the cooperative sector can perhaps start to structure their messages towards educating the Canadian business community. For example, retaining employment in communities, right, was one of the reasons they gave, one of the factors they gave us, or advantages they perceive. It's a viable business model if all else fails. So as a last resort, it perhaps is a viable business model. They care about saving jobs and assisting local communities. Guarantees for business continuity by accessing the skills and know-hows of employees and the community. Staff empowerment leads to more business tenacity and efficiency. And lastly, some of them felt that this was an advancement in social justice, that more co-ops means a more socially just society. This links up to findings in Europe, in my research and other research projects that have found that these are all advantages that cooperatives show, and in particular, succession or conversion to co-ops show. So, and what are important factors for succession? Here, I want to just emphasize that these are, of all, our entire sample of 319, these are also further proxies that, although they don't know about the cooperative model, these could be interpreted as also proxies for, that they're amenable to, they could be amenable to the cooperative solution if they know more about co-ops. And that is retaining know-how, markets, and value. That's what they want for succession. So these are of everybody that answered, and this is what they want out of their succession plan. It doesn't have to be a cooperative succession, but they want to retain know-how, markets, and value. They want to secure a business's continuity, and they want to secure the jobs of employees. These are all strengths of cooperatives. So again, here's a messaging opportunity and an in to communicate to the policymakers and to, in particular, small and medium-sized business owners. What's the lesson here? The lesson from our survey is that the co-op sector has much more educating to do about the advantages of the cooperative model, in particular to mainstream businesses and retiring business owners, and also policymakers as well. And also that rather than promoting the value of cooperatives for community development, this is an obvious value, but rather than focusing on the community advantages, focus on the business strengths of cooperatives. This is our overarching message, I think, to the cooperative sector, and how we can start to frame messaging around conversions to cooperatives as a model. So I'm going to pass it on now to Fiona, who will, Fiona and Jose, who will discuss the case studies that we'll be sharing with you today.
Great, thanks, Marcelo. So part of our methodology was to also do some deep dives into some cases, examples of conversions that have happened in Canada. And so we're going to do about 12 to 15 of these. And just to bring a flavor of this, we're riffing off of what we found in the database that Jose presented a little bit earlier on. And so we were able to look at that and go, okay, across, we want to make sure we have representation of case studies that are across Canada. We want to make sure that we have good representation from both Francophone Canada as well as Anglophone Canada. We want to make sure we have different conversions into different types of co-ops. We want to also make sure we have case studies that representative of different kinds of industries or sectors that they are co-ops are converting in and into. And we also wanted to make sure we had a representation of kind of like maturity. So we know there are examples of conversions that have happened, 20, 25 years ago, and ones that are currently happening right now. So we wanted to make sure we wanted to capture that as well. And we also wanted to make sure we captured ones that are currently active and also ones that are inactive. In order to try to capture what happened in those moments, what happened on those journeys, what happened in those stories. So I'm going to turn it over to José, who is going to talk about some examples in Francophone Canada.
Thanks, Fiona. Donc, un des exemples, en fait, aujourd'hui, je vais vous présenter deux exemples sur lesquels on a pris un peu plus de temps, en fait, à étudier. Donc, le premier cas est la coopérative de travailleurs d'ambulance de l'Estrie. Dans un deuxième temps, on va aborder la Fédération des coopératives funéraires du Québec et sa stratégie, en fait, pour faciliter la conversion d'entreprises funéraires en coopératives. Donc, dans un premier temps, la coopérative de travailleurs d'ambulance de l'Estrie, c'est un cas auquel on s'est intéressé parce qu'elle est typique, en fait, du processus de conversion qui a eu lieu surtout au cours des années 80 dans le secteur ambulancier au Québec. Au début des années 80, il y a eu à la fois un mouvement de syndicalisation des travailleurs du secteur ambulancier et à la fois un mouvement de restructuration du système par le gouvernement qui a amené beaucoup de changements dans les entreprises privées. À l'époque, au début 80, il y avait 23 entreprises privées qui desservaient le territoire du Québec pour des services d'ambulance. Donc, la restructuration a amené un malencontreux effet pour les propriétaires d'entreprises privées qui cherchent d'abord à avoir un profit, c'est-à-dire qu'ils réduisaient leur marge de manœuvre sur la capacité, en fait, à générer du profit. 80% des coûts étaient associés à la masse salariale. Donc, il y a eu un mouvement de masse où les entrepreneurs privés ont eu envie de vendre leur entreprise privée. Considérant que c'est dans le secteur ambulancier, l'un des principaux acheteurs aurait été l'État. Et donc, la deuxième option, la plus viable, à laquelle, en fait, il y a eu un certain mouvement qui a adhéré, était le fait de transformer les entreprises privées en coopératives de travailleurs. Donc, la coopérative de travailleurs d'ambulance de l'Estrie a fait partie de cette mouvance-là. Au début de l'année 2000, en 1999 plus particulièrement, l'entreprise Ambulance de l'Estrie a d'abord été acquise par une autre coopérative d'ambulance, donc la coopérative des ambulanciers de Mauricie, qui, à des fins de financement pour l'acquisition de l'entreprise, avait aussi pour condition de transformer ultérieurement l'entreprise privée qu'ils achetaient en coopérative de travailleurs. Ça a pris environ 5 ans. En 2005, ils ont entamé en fait le réel processus de coopérativisation, de transformation en coopérative de l'entreprise. Et ce processus s'est fait en 2 étapes. Donc, en 2005, tout d'abord, une coopérative de travailleurs actionnaires a été formée pour acquérir 1/3 des actions de l'entreprise d'ambulance de l'Estrie. Donc, il y avait 1/3 qui appartenait désormais à la coopérative d'ambulance de la Mauricie, 1/3 qui appartenait à la coopérative de travailleurs actionnaires et 1/3 qui appartenait à Fonds d'Action, qui était un financeur, en fait, un bailleur de fonds à ce moment-là. Et par la suite, donc, ils ont entamé un réel processus pour converger vers la coopérative de travailleurs, l'objectif étant que la coopérative rachète l'entièreté des actions de l'entreprise et devienne autonome par elle-même. Ils ont eu un accompagnement par notamment Fonds d'Action qui a été très actif, mais également la Confédération des syndicats nationaux par le biais de MCE Conseil, qui est une firme de consultants, en fait, qui sont des consultants spécialisés en conversion coopérative par des reprises d'employés. Alors, tout ce beau processus-là a mené à l'officialisation, en fait, de la coopérative de travail en 2010, qui est donc devenue la coopérative des travailleurs d'ambulance de l'Estrie. Il a racheté l'entièreté de l'entreprise et qui est devenue entièrement autonome et gérée par ses membres. Et actuellement, donc en 2020, il y a 160 membres travailleurs, donc 147 sont des paramédics, et ils desservent environ 20 000. Ils répondent à environ 20 000 appels par année sur le territoire de la région de l'Estrie. Voici pour l'histoire de la coopérative de travailleurs d'ambulance de l'Estrie. L'autre exemple dont il est question ici est celui de la Fédération des coopératives funéraires du Québec. Le processus de transformation d'entreprises privées en coopératives débute à peu près au même moment, c'est-à-dire au début des années 90. Dans le secteur funéraire, ce qui s'est produit à cette époque-là, c'est que les multinationales, autant canadiennes qu'américaines, ont vu un intérêt tout particulier à l'acquisition d'entreprises funéraires au Québec parce que les propriétaires commençaient déjà à l'époque à manquer de relève, de succession, parce que la population est vieillissante et parce que donc c'est relativement une entreprise avec moins de risques, disons, pour des raisons notamment démographiques. Et donc, il y a eu plusieurs acquisitions d'entreprises privées au début des années 90. La Fédération des coopératives funéraires du Québec venait d'être fondée en 1987. Je pense qu'elle représentait à l'époque une trentaine, une vingtaine de coopératives funéraires à travers le Québec. Et le directeur général de l'époque, surtout, s'est aperçu de cette espèce d'invasion américaine, comme il l'aime à la rappeler, donc qui venait acquérir des entreprises privées. Et collectivement, avec les autres coopératives, avec les coopératives funéraires du réseau et d'autres partenaires du mouvement coopératif, ils ont choisi de mettre sur pied un fonds de développement à l'interne, donc un fonds voué à l'acquisition et à la conversion d'entreprises privées, funéraires privées en coopératives. Donc, un fonds à l'époque de 1,5 million de dollars. Et la stratégie adoptée par la Fédération des coopératives funéraires du Québec à l'époque et encore aujourd'hui est de s'informer des propriétaires d'entreprises qui souhaitent vendre. D'ailleurs, ils reçoivent aussi parfois des appels de propriétaires qui veulent vendre et qui veulent vendre localement. Donc, ils acquièrent l'entreprise et souvent, il y a deux choix, en fait, ou bien l'entreprise privée qui est acquise par la Fédération est intégrée au sein d'une coopérative qui existe déjà, ou bien, s'il n'y a pas de coopérative funéraire sur les territoires, il arrive que l'entreprise soit tout simplement convertie avec les acteurs locaux et donc convertie en coopérative à partir des acteurs qui sont présents. Alors, la Fédération, à ce moment-là, a fait office à la fois de soutien financier, mais surtout d'expertise technique, donc dans l'accompagnement de la conversion et dans la transition vers des coopératives funéraires, ce qui fait qu'aujourd'hui, il y a environ 30 coopératives membres de la Fédération à ce jour et ils ont une centaine de points de service à leur actif, donc au Québec essentiellement, mais aussi parfois au Canada et même ailleurs dans le monde. Alors, c'est une autre stratégie qui a été choisie par la Fédération et qui permet la conversion d'entreprises funéraires en coopératives. Thank you.
Thanks, José. I'm going to present a couple of examples of conversions that have happened in other parts of Canada. I'm going to preface this by saying that the rest of Canada does sort of play out a little bit differently than in Quebec. What we have seen in the rest of Canada is a little more ad hoc kind of development and conversion to the co-op model, where there isn't all of the infrastructure in place. There isn't a sort of systematic process that people who are interested in this can walk through while there are definitely key knowledge holders around how to do this process, it isn't necessarily laid out in a set of sort of guidelines and sort of, as I said, policies and infrastructure in place. So what we see is much more of an ad hoc kind of process in the rest of Canada. What we also see in the rest of Canada is that it's very much grounded in community needs. This desire to keep goods or services and or places where the community feels safe or are serviced. We see this emerging quite a bit in terms of sort of motivation for the conversion. We also see emerging co-ops that are made by the community and for the community. And I really will use that language of community as a really sort of wide way. And we're going to see that in, as I bring forward two examples. The first example is Glitter Bean Cafe Co-op, and this is in Halifax, Nova Scotia. This is a cafe that has its history in the LGBTQ plus community, also has some deep roots in terms of activism and union organizing for better labor practices. It also has its some roots in co-op friendly sort of spaces and mindset. It emerged out of the desire for creating a safe workplace and a safe place for LGBTQ plus community in Halifax, especially when there was a dearth of places where folks from that community felt comfortable as a place to work and also as a place to be and to live and feel safe in the cafe. Some key supports around the conversion, and this is really in terms of human resources, management development and support, co-op development, as well as financial support. So we see that the union, SEIU, was an important player in terms of helping both financially as well as supporting in the conversion process. As I mentioned before, there was an ethos of cooperation in working with Just Us Coffee Roasters, and they were definitely very supportive in the process as well. So bringing that sort of co-op knowledge and opening up the sort of space for that conversation. The worker owners themselves, both in terms of finances and also the sweat equity that goes into it in order to make that conversion happen. And then also, as I mentioned before, the key knowledge holders around the development process is a key support in order to help Glitter Bean be able to do that conversion process. I'm going to turn now to the next example in Canada. This is the Erin Theatre Cooperative, and this is in Campbellford. Some of you may have heard about Erin Theatre. Some of you may have also heard about Glitter Bean, of course. But Erin Theatre is kind of has become sort of a classic example in Anglophone Canada of a co-op conversion. And again, we see the drive as a community, in this case a geographic community, small town Ontario, and the need to keep that community theatre. We see it emerge because the owner of the theatre, which was, ultimately, as Marcelo talked about earlier on, was that SME owner, was looking to sell or looking to close. The community came together in order to literally save their community theater. They wanted to keep this iconic venue alive in their community. It's in the middle of their town. They wanted it to be a vibrant place for their community. Again, just speaking to some of those key supports in order to help with that conversion process. Again, we're thinking about different kinds of HR and support around that, around management support, around co-op development support, and the financial support. We see again here that a key knowledge holder in the co-op developer being able to really champion this model, this conversion process. We see some government support coming into play here in this case. We see also a community foundation coming in and supporting in terms of creating some financing opportunities. And again, of course, what we see emerging is the sweat equity of members. In this case, it became a consumer co-op. And so it's the members of the community who help to really turn this and convert this into a co-op. And so different from what Jose presented to us in terms of the two case studies that she has outlined in Quebec, we see some different sort of themes emerging in the rest of Canada and in Anglophone Canada. I'm going to turn it back to Marcelo now. Oh, you're on mute, Marcelo. You're on mute.
Yes, sorry. Thank you, Fiona. Thanks, thanks, Jose. Very succinct. That's great. Thank you. So now, and heading towards the end of our presentation, I'd like to open up the question: is there an emerging typology of business conversions to cooperatives in Canada? I'd like to bring everything we've talked about so far into like a summary of our research, to see what kind of learnings and lessons we can draw from the data that we're gathering, and also what future does this model hold in Canada. So is there a Canadian model for conversions? We really have to think about Quebec as being the place where these have happened the longest and where the model tends to be much more defined and, if you will, institutionalized. The rest of Canada, as Fiona said, is an ad hoc approach, but it does tend to be, we can find trends across Canada, including Quebec. And that is, in Canada, it tends to be a negotiated conversion model. The conversions tend not to happen with firms that are in crisis in dramatic ways like they do in Latin America, and that's because of our particular political economic context. But they do also happen in those scenarios, and they have in the past. And really a succession problem here. It's a problem of business continuity. The owner or owners do not want to, or do not want to continue with the business, or have reached retirement age and they want to pass on the business, and then what happens? So what this guarantees is that, or at least it suggests that there's another kind of ownership group that can be approached, and that's the very workers, first and foremost, of these firms, or the workers and the managers. Managers are also workers. So a combination of workers and managers or administrators. In the case of Aaron, it was the community that came together. It was a theater, didn't have many employees. So the community came together and formed a community, what they call, it's formally a consumer co-op, but in Campbellford, the Aaron members call themselves a community co-op. Or a combination of memberships in multi-stakeholder cooperatives, solidarity cooperatives in Quebec. It could be a multiplicity of owners, of new owners that all participate in the new cooperative and the continuity of the business. So they tend to happen in labor-intensive sectors, not necessarily in capital-intensive sectors. Around the world, this is the case, and also in Canada, but not necessarily so. One can argue that the ambulance sector is capital-intensive. I mean, those ambulances and the equipment cost a lot of money. But they tend to be in places where, in firms where there's high skills needed. So as in the ambulance sector, the paramedic sector, there weren't others to take over. It has to be the paramedics, right? They're the ones that are most knowledgeable. Or the community. This is where, as Fiona said, where the community, where this business is so important to the community, for whatever reason, that there is a strong possibility that the community would agree to or wants to take over and convert the firm into a cooperative. And usually it taps into strong community networks. This is what the Glitterbean showed, and Aaron as well. And ultimately, there has to be usually, and in Canada, what happens is there's a bit of serendipity. This is why it's ad hoc. There's a bit of, is the timing right? And is there a proper, what we're calling, enabler? There is usually an individual that enables the conversion, that has the vision for the conversion, or it could be a group. In Glitterbean, it was a group of enablers, it was the workers. But in the rest of Canada, and even in Quebec, it tends to be the owner, usually it's a community developer, or sorry, it's a cooperative developer. Usually it's a cooperative developer that's in the community, that knows about how to convert, or that can tap into resources. It's this individualistic approach, or there has to be somebody to bring it all together. And we've interviewed all those people in Canada. And so we have tapped into their knowledge base. In Quebec, it tends to be a bit different in that there's already an infrastructure in place, and we'll get into some of the supporting mechanisms in Quebec and compare it to the rest of Canada. So ultimately, these are all what we call enabling environments. And we need to increase awareness of this enabling environment. We need to not make it just so cooperative developers know about this, but that this is actually taught in business schools, that business owners know about this, and that policymakers also know about this to expand the enabling environment scenario in Canada. So what do we mean by enabling environments? Well, there's a set of things that have to happen, a set of activities, of organizations that collectively come together in all types of conversions. This has to happen all the time. It has to be present all the time. Otherwise, a conversion won't happen. We call these enabling environments. We're calling these in our project enabling environments. They've also been called ecosystems for business conversions. And they tap into the cooperative ecosystem, but more broadly into the business ecosystem and the social, political ecosystem, political economy and policies. So for example, knowledge and awareness, the characteristic of the firms. Not all firms are ready to convert to cooperative or able to convert to cooperative. We could talk a bit about what types of firms these would be in our question and answer period. The stakeholders, you know, are they willing to do this? Do they want to be collective owners of a business? The legal and policy framework, which is probably the weakest in Canada. This is, whereas comparing Canada to Italy, in Italy, there's a really strong legal and policy framework. There's a really clear legal and funding and financing model to convert cooperatives, to convert businesses to cooperatives through worker buyouts. In Canada, this is more ad hoc, and there isn't a clear map of how this can happen. And things like tax incentives and other kind of ways of capitalizing, which tends to be the biggest problem. This has to be worked out more in Canada. And through our work, and we know the CMC and CWCF and other federations and associations around Canada are really interested in improving these particular areas, legal and policy frameworks and funding and financing. And ultimately, catalyzers and enablers. We have to expand those that are catalyzers and enablers for conversions. So we have to educate more. We have to create more cooperative developers that are ready and able and know the pieces to put in place to convert businesses to cooperative. So what's the process? And then this is much more involved and detailed than this. This is like a really broad kind of high level look at what it would take. What are the pathways in general in Canada to convert? That there has to be some kind of a socioeconomic relationship that has coming to an end for some reason. There's some discontinuation of the business. There's a conversion opportunity and a necessity that's recognized. And a nucleus of people come together and form a team, what we call a core team, made up of accountants, valuators, cooperative developers, cooperative associations, employees, the community. There has to be some public support that emerges. Employees are part of the public, and also these businesses need to tap into public funds. And so there has to be some kind of interest in the community that tends to be what kind of drives and encourages these to form. And then capital has to be arranged and found from some place. And it's a bit complicated as to where that capital comes from. In the rest of Canada and Quebec, there are more possibilities. Then there's a transition period. Usually a cooperative is set up separately, and the cooperative actually then takes over, that entity takes over usually the business, usually the building and the assets, and it becomes a cooperative. And then there's other kind of business development, strategic marketing, and making sure clients are secured, and all those other things that have to happen when starting up any business. So in essence, when it becomes a cooperative, it's not a clear startup, obviously, because assets and that are already transferred from the previous business. But the new owners, the new collective owners, have to learn how to become owners and learn how to strategize around business issues. So these are some of the things that this is some of the process that's involved in Canada, and what we need to educate more around, and we need to develop support. The cooperative sector needs to develop further supports around these issues as well. I'm going to pass it on to José and she'll discuss some of the different ways of converting. We're finding that there are different trajectories in our data.
Thanks, Marcello. Donc, j'allais partir en anglais. Donc, avec Marcello, on a vu le portrait général, en fait, du processus qui mène à une conversion, donc un événement qui arrive, qui amène les gens à se mobiliser, éventuellement à acquérir l'entreprise. Qu'on constate dans notre banque de données, dans les cas qu'on étudie, dans nos discussions avec les experts du domaine de la conversion, c'est qu'il existe différents disons, sous-routes ou trajectoires qui existent pour mener vers la conversion. Le premier cas le plus classique est mais qu'on a exclu en fait de notre définition des conversions, c'est l'acquisition d'entreprises privées par des coopératives. Donc des coopératives, certaines coopératives, surtout celles qui ont quand même un actif assez important, vont acquérir des entreprises privées, mais vont les conserver à l'état d'entreprise à capital action, bien qu'elles soient donc dans le giron coopératif, disons-le comme ça. On ne les a pas considérées comme des conversions dans le cadre de la recherche actuelle. Ce qu'on constate par contre, l'exemple de la Fédération des coopératives funéraires est un bon exemple là-dessus, et même celle de la coopérative des travailleurs d'ambulance de l'Estrie, c'est que certaines coopératives qui ont un bon pouvoir d'achat, qui ont une certaine aussi ancienneté, vont acquérir des entreprises privées pour soit les intégrer à leurs propres actifs. C'est le cas, comme je le disais, de ce qu'on a vu tout à l'heure, mais aussi, par exemple, de Citadel, qui est une coopérative de producteurs de sirop d'érable, qui a intégré, lors de l'acquisition d'une entreprise de transformation de canneberge, qui a intégré les membres producteurs, les producteurs de canneberge à titre de membres dans ses propres activités. Donc, il y a une certaine forme, ils acquièrent l'entreprise privée avant de transformer son statut, soit en l'intégrant dans leurs propres actifs, ou en créant tout simplement une nouvelle entité autonome, donc en supportant en fait le processus de conversion en coopérative. Un autre cas le plus commun probablement parmi les exemples justement que Fiona a présenté tout à l'heure et donc dont on a recensé, c'est une coopérative qui se crée, donc une nouvelle entité coopérative qui se crée de toutes pièces par des travailleurs, par des membres de la communauté ou autres, et qui éventuellement acquiert une entreprise. On a décliné sous 3 formes différentes. La principale différence étant, à des fins strictement techniques, entre des coopératives qui achètent une entreprise privée en situation financière difficile. Donc, on va plutôt parler de relance. Par exemple, une entreprise qui est en train de faire faillite va être récupérée et remise sur pied. Dans d'autres cas, une coopérative plus rare, dans d'autres cas, ils vont tout simplement acheter une entreprise existante sans forcément avoir de raison X parce que l'entreprise est à vendre tout simplement, mais elle va être en très bonne santé. Et dans d'autres cas, la coopérative va se créer plutôt comme au sein de l'entreprise en collaboration avec le propriétaire. Et c'est dans ces cas-ci particulièrement que le processus se déroule le plus en douceur en fait. C'est que c'est une initiative conjointe du propriétaire avec, par exemple, les employés ou avec la communauté locale. Et donc, la coopérative est créée et le propriétaire aussi, propriétaire qui cède son entreprise, va guider la transmission de la coopérative. Dans d'autres cas, là, on parle de transmission partielle. On parle surtout, comme on mentionnait tout à l'heure, des coopératives de travailleurs actionnaires. Et dans certains cas plus rares, un peu plus communs peut-être en France, l'entreprise change son statut avant d'être transmise à des employés, par exemple. On voit des entreprises privées qui se transforment en coopératives avant même que et dont le propriétaire demeure membre, en fait, ou devient membre fondateur et éventuellement quitte après quelques années de transition. Ce sont des cas plus rares, mais qui, quand même, peuvent arriver. Et enfin, le dernier cas, la relance indirecte qu'on nomme, est une initiative généralement communautaire. Donc là, on parle plus d'épicerie locale, de stations-service, à la rigueur de théâtre, comme le Run Theatre, ou d'autres instituts comme ça, qui ferment complètement pour 1 année, 2 années, 3 années. Donc un certain nombre d'années avant qu'il y ait une initiative de la communauté pour remettre sur pied un projet similaire. Donc, encore une fois, ici, il ne s'agit pas de conversion, mais c'est éventuellement une reprise ou une relance indirecte d'une activité qui avait été interrompue quelques années plus tôt. Donc, soit sous le même concept, soit avec dans le même lieu, en reprenant le concept ailleurs, etc. Donc, c'est une autre façon de faire pour redonner un peu de vie, surtout dans les communautés plus rurales dans ce cas-ci. I'm going to let it to you, Marcelo.
Yes. Okay, so really briefly, how are conversions to cooperatives financed in Canada outside of Quebec? It's an ad hoc approach again. there are funding sources that the cooperative sector and those that are converting to cooperatives, especially cooperative developers, have had to creatively come up with. Two major initiatives spearheaded by the cooperative sector is, and this is the first one, was that directly was related to conversions to cooperatives, was the Canadian Worker Cooperative Federation's Tenacity Works. I think currently there's about $25 million. It's a patient capital investment fund where conversions to worker co-ops and multi-stakeholder co-ops can happen, and some conversions have drawn funds from Tenacity Works. The other one that is a potential for funds for conversions, but none have been used so far, in my understanding, is the CMC's initiated Canadian Cooperative Investment Fund, another multi-million-dollar kind of chest of funds available, patient capital funds available for cooperative development, and that can be tapped into for conversions. And then the creative part comes here in using other mechanisms of the social and solidarity economy. For example, community bonds, or using RRSPs or TFSAs, tax-free savings accounts, or RRSPs that are geared towards community development, social impact bonds if applicable, regional community economic development funds from the federal and provincial governments, and there's several kinds around Canada. But these all have to be applied to. Somebody has to know how to do this, right? So this complicates matters. Then, workers and community savings, that want to invest, that become members of the co-op. And less so, and this is kind of disappointing to us to find out that the credit union movement hasn't really stepped up. And here's maybe a critique that we can, that's cooperative movement members can level at ourselves, that the credit union movement, save for perhaps Van City, and I apologize to other credit unions out there that have invested in conversions, it's just as difficult sometimes as the regular banks to get funds to fund these conversions. So I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but there isn't a set way of doing it, right? So here's another way that the cooperative movement can probably step up and assist in these conversions. So I'm going to pass it on now to José, who will talk a bit about what happens in Quebec around financing and supports.
Oui, donc merci Marcello. Au Québec, le reprenariat collectif est dans les stratégies gouvernementales depuis quelques années déjà. Donc, on vante beaucoup les mérites du reprenariat collectif. Et là, ici, que ce soit sous la forme coopérative ou sous la forme d'organismes à but non lucratif, tout ça est mis un peu dans le même chapeau. En 2013, si je ne m'abuse, du moins au début des années 2010, le gouvernement a même mis en place un centre de transfert d'entreprises du Québec dont une partie est dédiée à la promotion du reprenariat collectif et à l'accompagnement dans le reprenariat collectif. Donc, c'est une initiative gouvernementale qui a été mise en place. Autrement, il y a le réseau coopératif habituel. Le Conseil québécois de la coopération et de la mutualité a publié quelques guides sur la conversion d'entreprises en coopératives, un qui s'adresse par exemple aux cédants. Il y a un lien ici sur le PowerPoint, et un autre qui s'adresse aux employés. C'est similaire, mais étant donné que le processus peut varier légèrement selon qu'on soit celui qui cède l'entreprise ou ceux qui reprennent l'entreprise. Donc, il y a deux guides distincts qui ont été élaborés par le Conseil québécois de la coopération et de la mutualité, en partenariat d'ailleurs avec MCE Conseil, notamment. Et donc, MCE Conseil, comme je l'ai mentionné tout à l'heure dans la coopérative de travailleurs de l'ambiance de l'Estrie, ils accompagnent des processus de transformation d'entreprise en coopérative reprises par des employés syndiqués. Donc, on est dans le milieu syndical, dans les conversions d'entreprises qui sont accompagnées par MCE Conseil et généralement soutenues financièrement par la Confédération des syndicats nationaux ou d'autres instances syndicales dans ce cas-ci. Donc, il y a deux grandes voies, en fait. Il y a celle des reprises d'entreprises accompagnées par le mouvement syndical par le biais de MCE Conseil et d'autres affiliations syndicales. Et l'autre voie qui relève davantage, par exemple, soit des fédérations, elles ne sont pas nommées ici, mais les fédérations, il y a des fédérations très fortes au Québec, comme la Fédération des coopératives funéraires du Québec, mais d'autres fédérations qui accompagnent également, qui peuvent appuyer la transition justement d'une entreprise privée vers une coopérative. Il y a le réseau de la coopération du travail qui est spécialisé dans les coopératives de travailleurs et donc il y a une expertise très développée à ce niveau-là. Et toutes les coopératives, la coopérative de développement régional du Québec et ses différentes instances régionales peuvent accompagner dans la création, bien sûr, de coopératives, mais également dans le volet de conversion en coopérative. Et une multitude de sources de financement qui sont offertes par Investissement Québec, la Caisse d'économie solidaire et Desjardins, par ailleurs. Pardon. Donc, comme Marcello mentionnait, il y a un système quand même un peu plus établi au Québec, mais on ne se sort pas des conclusions que Marcello a faites, c'est-à-dire qu'on n'en parle pas suffisamment encore de la conversion d'entreprises, de la reprise d'entreprises, notamment par des coopératives, ce qui fait que c'est un modèle qu'on voit de plus en plus, mais il reste encore il reste encore à en parler un petit peu plus. So I'm letting it back to you, I think, Marcello, to end this up with Fiona.
I think it's going to be Fiona, and we're going to conclude with 2 more slides. Let's talk about the future, the present and the future of the project, and what we'd like to envision for the legacy of the project and moving forward.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Jose, and thanks, Marcello. So as we talked about at the beginning, a big part of this project was to work with the university and community sector. And in this case, our main community partner was and is called CMC. But in this whole process, what we have found so happily and in such an exciting moment that this is that there is so many other organizations that are keen and interested and captivated by the opportunity that this is. Again, not to glaze over the challenges and the pain points and the tricky parts of it, I think this moment for conversions is really ripe. And as a result, we have been able to work with some very fine other organizations as well. And there's a list of them, of folks there who have come on board with our project, and we've jumped on board with their project. It's very much a two-way back and forth. And the exciting part about doing this kind of research is that it's really about, as I mentioned before, that second objective, which is really about capacity building for the co-op sector. And so how do we do that? There is not a better way to do that than lifting up other organizations that do amazing work. And so just to advance the slide.
Yeah. So we're gonna conclude it now and open it up to questions, but
yeah.
Thought we quickly talk about what we envision for the future, Fiona.
Okay, sure.
These are just some points that these aren't exhaustive, but.
No, they're not. The world is our oyster in this opportunity, the opportunities that are emerging at the moment, that's for sure. As Marcella said at the beginning, we are in year 3 of this particular grant that we have. And so what are we going to do in this sort of moment, and then how is it going to continue to have legs after the sort of funding moment is over? So we've got a couple of bullet points up there, as Marcella said, and I want to, first of all, and I think we all want to throw this open to everybody to be able to say, do you see yourself in any of these, either as an individual or as an organization, or being a part of an organization that is part of the co-op sector? And if so, please get in touch with us. We see that there's a huge scope for opportunity around helping to share the learnings that we have gained and the insight we have gained from the project in order to develop mechanisms to bolster the Canadian, this enabling environment for VCCs. And so some of the ways that can happen that we can see very easily on sort of the low-hanging fruit, definitely, that we can easily move towards, and then sort of that more medium hanging fruit, and then the higher, lofty aspirations. but definitely we see an open source research repository for research that's happening around this in Canada. We see how the research that we've been able to do and the very on-the-ground experiences that we've heard and people have been so willing to share with us, and how we can then inform how-to guides and that sort of path that we've been talking about, that stream, to make it a little bit easier for people to know how to do this. We see an opportunity of how, now we really know that SME owners, while they may have that propensity but may not know about it, that awareness raising, which is a chronic issue within the co-op sector, as we all know. Okay, how can we work towards that? And we're hoping that our research will be able to get that, help to streamline that how just that much better. As well as also, as Marcel said, like building off of the experiences around the world, where what kinds of policy and development support systems can be put in place that aren't necessarily remaking the wheel, but in fact riffing off of what has worked in other jurisdictions. And we can see very clearly that there are things that we could adapt and adopt here in Canada. I'm going to turn it over to Marcelo for any sort of final words on sort of where we would like to go in this funding moment, but then also afterwards.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to conclude, and we've been talking for a long time, so I do want to open it up to questions. I want to conclude that all of our data that we've accumulated and continue to accumulate will be, in essence, seeded to the cooperative sector. We are in the process of, we have a website, but we're sprucing it up and specifically customizing it to be a repository of all of our research, and that can actually be a continuation of our project where everything to do with conversions to cooperatives can reside. And we're working with CMC, CWCF, Cooperatives First, and others to envision this kind of research repository and resource website. And that's going to be one takeaway. And we continue to work and are thrilled to be working with the cooperative sector to envision ways of proposing new laws, legislation, and envisioning funding mechanisms, and ultimately promoting. And we're educators too. Everybody that's researching in this project are educators, and we're community educators, and we're really keen and interested in sharing with you all and hearing from you as to how we can communicate and share and mobilize knowledge, this knowledge to both the cooperative sector, but the Canadian business community and policymakers as well. So that's, those are some of our visions. We, of course, are publishing academic papers. We envision, we are planning to produce a book where our case studies will be synthesized and shared. And all of this that you've heard today and more will be communicated and published for the general public as well. For that, I mean, with that, I think we've talked enough. If you want to know more about this project, find out more, here's my contact information and our website. And please feel free to email me or Fiona or Jose or others on the team. You'll see them. If you go to the website, you'll see the different, the entire team. So we look forward to hearing from you. And I guess we'll open it up to questions. I'm not exactly sure how this is going to happen right now. So we've got about 20 minutes, I think. I think it's through the chat function, correct?
Yes, so if you have questions, you can put them in the chats.
Marcelo, I see there is one question for
Okay.
you from Wendy Home. I guess if you open up the chat window on your screen, you can see.
Yeah, I'm not really sure how to do this because I am sharing the screen. Should I stop sharing the screen? You don't have to see my, you don't have to see my picture anymore.
Well, if you click on the, I don't know.
Should I stop sharing the screen and then we can, it'll be just our faces, but.
Yes, I think you can do that.
Okay, there we go. And then.
There is like a
Aha.
conversation. You see, there is one behind that asks if you can
Yes.
talk about the elder care co-ops.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not seeing that one, but okay, so maybe you can read the question.
Yes,
Yep.
so there is a question here. Have you seen an example of an enterprise that starts with a plan to eventually become a cooperative? Jose mentioned a model where the owner becomes a shareholder and stays on for a few years for the transition. What is it called?
OK. Si je réponds en français, c'est correct?
Yes, of course.
OK, merci. Donc, le modèle le plus commun qu'on voit, généralement, ça va être des coopératives de travailleurs. Dans ce qu'on a vu jusqu'à maintenant, ce sont des coopératives de travailleurs. Et donc, ce qui arrive, c'est que le propriétaire actuel décide collectivement avec les employés de transformer son entreprise directement en coopérative avant même de quitter. Comme je l'ai mentionné, c'est beaucoup plus rare. Mais ça, on a vu quelques cas plutôt en France qu'ici, en fait, où ça s'est produit. Donc, le propriétaire devient membre de la coopérative et éventuellement va quitter. Un autre modèle qu'on a vu rapidement, on n'a pas encore eu l'occasion de l'explorer, c'est au Nouveau-Brunswick. Il s'agissait d'une ferme familiale, en fait, qui a été transformée en coopérative de travailleurs pour assurer la relève familiale. En fait, ce sont les enfants du propriétaire qui ont démarré la coopérative avec le propriétaire de la ferme, donc le papa, pour éventuellement transformer, élargir la coopérative, accueillir plus de membres travailleurs et permettre plus facilement la transition vers la retraite du père de famille. Donc, ça peut probablement se produire dans tous les types de coopératives, mais on l'observe plus fréquemment dans des cas de coopératives de travailleurs, donc où le propriétaire devient temporairement un membre aussi de la coopérative avant de quitter. J'espère que ça répond à la question.
Great. There's another question here from Margaret Bao. It's really interesting, and yes, we're aware of this. So a methodology being explored in the US, especially among low-income workers, is a conversion holding company. A benevolent nonprofit will buy a business and hold it for conversion. This allows the employees the time to develop ownership skills and accumulate money to buy a business from the holding company. Is this a strategy in Canada? Well, it's not a policy in Canada, so it's not formalized, but in ways, the way that conversions happen in Quebec are like this. Perhaps the Funeral Federation is a way of articulating this, but it's not exactly a holding company. I know this is happening, and Margaret also points out that this model is being explored in Cleveland in the Evergreen Cooperative model. I know it's in its infancy there as well. So, but this is a very, very interesting model that could be easily emulated, I think, in Canada. And Quebec, in essence, does this in, for example, the funeral co-op conversions are a type of this, and that it's not really a holding company, but they, as Jose explained, in many cases, and what they usually do is purchase a family funeral home and then convert it into a cooperative. So the federation becomes, in essence, a holding company. This is the only kind of similar model that I'm aware of in Canada. The rest of Canada, it tends to be a one-stop shop, ad hoc. It's, you know, there isn't this mechanism in place. This is something that I know, I don't know if anybody from Van City is here, but I know that Van City has been interested in conversions. And this is something that a Van City could develop potentially. I mean, you know, if the will and the way of doing it could be developed. So rather than giving out a loan is directly to one particular case is to do this kind of holding company approach. I think it could work. In Italy, it kind of works this way, but it's like the Italian state and the cooperative federations act as a holding company in essence. They have, there's one institute in Italy that's co-owned by the Italian state, by the Ministry of the Economy, and by the cooperative federations, and by the cooperatives it converts. It's called CFE, Cooperative Finanza Imprese. And in essence do this. They're the ones that manage the money that goes out towards converting firms into cooperatives, and they have this holding company model, but it's just one institute. It's this one kind of third-tier cooperative, kind of co-owned by the Italian state and the Italian cooperative federations. There are different models around the world like this. But Fiona?
I was just going to also add to that the L3 project, the leadership, legacy, and I'm forgetting the other L right off the top of my head. My apologies.
Leadership Legacy Lab.
Leadership Legacy Lab. Thank you. They have been bringing together folks from across Canada that are really looking at the conversion to social purpose organization, which, of course, as we know, could be a co-op, but also could be other kinds of organizational structures. And I have heard within that group that there is some movement and ideas emerging around this very idea, this nonprofit holding kind of company in Alberta, interestingly, but not necessarily just to make co-ops, but to make potentially nonprofits, or to make land trusts, or to make other kinds of more social purpose types of businesses. Again, what organizational structure they're actually using or incorporation is a little bit more open in that space. So it has kind of been emerging in Canada, but not specifically and only for co-op development.
I wanted to, thanks, Fiona. I'm just reading some of the comments, and Hazel corrected me. I misspoke, and I knew this, I just misspoke. That it's the $25 million is held by the CCIF, not Tenacity Works. Tenacity Works currently has about $500,000. But anyway, everything else holds. So Hazel Corcoran was the ED of the Canadian Worker Cooperative Federation, corrected me there. I just wanted to say that. I also wanted to address Wendy Holmes' question about the use of this model for converting, saving elder care homes, perhaps, or ways of doing it. So I do want to point out, in one of our cases that we're still working on is a case of a conversion to a cooperative that was CareForce. CareForce exists, it still exists, but it's not a cooperative anymore, unfortunately, for us that are cooperative champions. CareForce was a collective, a cooperative of care home workers for the elderly that was formed about a decade ago when the owner decided to leave the sector, and it was bought out by the almost all female care workers. And it was an active conversion to a worker cooperative for about a decade. It actually then merged with another care home cooperative in Nova Scotia, and it was expanding, and we don't know the details yet, but it's not a cooperative anymore. It demutualized. So CareForce was one example that was a very rich example in Canada. And a study at the onset of COVID, shortly, about a few months ago, there was a study done in Ontario, and that showed that the care homes that fared the worst in the COVID pandemic were private care homes, privately owned care homes. In Quebec, in Ontario, the early outbreaks of COVID were mostly in private care homes. The ones that fared the best were, secondly, and with many less infections, were non-for-profit care homes, and some of them are cooperatives, and in public sector care homes. So you can draw conclusions as to why that's the case. Right, privatizing care is not the way to go, and cooperativizing care could be an answer, and is an answer, and is the way to go. So conversions to cooperatives are certainly something that we're actually looking at, not to do the conversions, but to see what should be taken up. It's something that we've contemplated anyway amongst the project folks. We've talked about it, and so hopefully our research will inform the process and help in that case. Jose, did you have a comment?
Yes, I just wanted to add something from Quebec in that case specifically. For the okay, I'll go in French if you don't mind. En ce qui concerne justement les coopératives coopératives d'habitation essentiellement au Québec, Il y a un modèle qui s'est développé depuis une quinzaine d'années, un petit peu plus, une vingtaine d'années peut-être, qui consiste en des coopératives de solidarité, donc multi-stakeholders cooperatives, qui sont mises en place en fait dans des communautés rurales essentiellement, soit parce qu'il n'y a pas, dans certains cas, il y a création tout simplement de coopératives lorsqu'il n'y a pas d'accès à ces services sur place, mais aussi on a vu un cas dernièrement de reprise d'une entreprise privée par une coopérative de solidarité. Et donc, la façon dont ça fonctionne, c'est essentiellement que c'est la communauté qui devient membre de la coopérative. Et donc, dans l'objectif ultime, c'est vraiment de pouvoir conserver les personnes dans leur lieu de vie, dans leur lieu de naissance. Et donc, la communauté met en place une coopérative de solidarité et devient membre auxiliaire, membre de soutien de la coopérative pour qu'il y ait accès à ce service-là dans la communauté. C'est un modèle qui pourrait probablement prendre de l'ampleur encore plus, notamment dans les régions rurales. Jusqu'à maintenant, ce qu'on observe, c'est que les travailleurs ne deviennent pas forcément, ne deviennent pas membres, en fait, de la coopérative jusqu'à maintenant, mais ça pourrait probablement être combiné. Les résidents deviennent membres consommateurs et la communauté membre de soutien, ce qui permet de conserver les services. Alors, ça va un peu dans le... C'est juste pour compléter sur ce qui se passe là, depuis quelques années au Québec à ce sujet-là.
I wanted to also, Amy asks, have you seen an example of an enterprise that starts with a plan to eventually become a cooperative? Jose mentioned that the model where the owner becomes a shareholder and stays on for a few years for the transition. So one way of, you don't have to convert to start a cooperative. We can all get together and decide to start a cooperative. It's just like any other business is it's like starting a business. It's another business model. I don't know of any case that started as a different type of business in Canada with the vision of converting in the future. Usually this tends to happen later on in the business when there's some sort of a situation where the closure of the business is imminent. And a group of stakeholders, usually workers, but not necessarily, then decide, you know what, we want to continue with this business. Often the owner has something to say and is involved in the process. We want to continue with this business, and so let's convert to a cooperative because that's a viable model. But I'm not aware of a worker or of an owner that actually founds a business thinking about converting to a cooperative. There was a case though in Kitchener. It's called Nelco Mechanical, and it's still around. And in the mid '80s, it was in electronics. It was into, I forgot what it made, but it made electronic things, piping and that. And it decided to, its owner, this is the second generation or third generation owner. It was the son of the previous owner who became the owner, decided to convert to cooperative and sell it to the workers. He wasn't successful at selling it to the workers. He sold it to the co-managers, and some of the workers came on board, and it was in essence a cooperative for several years. Now it's converted back into, it's still around, but it's converted back into not a cooperative. But that's the only case I know. But the original vision of the firm wasn't to convert to a cooperative. So I don't know if that answers the question. Usually there's some moment, something that happens in the business with the owner or with the workers that somehow the business will close. And then it's important enough to the stakeholders for them to go on this journey of converting to a cooperative. That's usually how it happens. And then there's how it converts. There's multiple ways of doing it in Canada as we've mapped out today. Are there any other questions? I could
just jump in really quick.
Sure.
Well, if you scroll it down in the Q&A, there's one from Stephen Gill, Marcelo.
Yeah, go ahead.
But actually, I'm going to tackle the one just before that from Claude Rivet. The PowerPoint presentation will be shared with participants, and Grace is your go-to person for that.
Yeah. Yes, so the PowerPoint will be shared with the participant tomorrow or at least Friday. So you can have the French and English version. And also the webinar is actually recording. So you will also have access to that.
Thank you, Gus, for clarifying that for us. I wanted to just very quickly tackle number 2 and number 3 to help you out, Claude. If you're speaking about co-ops in general, and specifically non-financial co-ops, then yes, there is a database. It's available through ISED, the Industry Canada. And they are the ones that have the most detailed information about the non-financial co-ops in Canada. So you need to connect with them, or feel free to touch base with us, and I can direct you towards it. The third one is a little trickier, the percentage of success of the operating co-ops once converted. That one is a little trickier, so you have to have a total N number in order to be able to run that stat. But what we can say is that for the most part, they do continue along. It is a good one for us to think about, though, like how long do they continue along? Are we looking at, if they get through 2 years, then they stay going and they stay active, or if they get 5 years or 10 years, or then, is there something about the sort of time frame that will tell us something about the sort of survival, so to speak, quote unquote? That would be an interesting stat to sort of see if we could figure out and run. The other thing I would say just around success in these final moments, or I want to give time to Marcelo to answer the other question. But success really is it active or inactive? And we really moved away from the language of failure and active, because we really wanted to acknowledge all of the lessons that are learned, all of the goods and services that are actually provided while it continues, the sweat equity that's put in and the work that's put in during that process. That whether they continue to be active or not, that is a legacy that is still held within the community and within individuals who are involved in the process. I'm going to turn it over to Marcelo for the other question.
Yeah, I just want to say that most of the conversions to cooperatives in our database are still around, and some of them date back to the early 80s and 70s. Our oldest ones are even longer. I think we have one that converted in 1945, or we have to confirm this in Quebec. We do have a handful of ones that have terminated for some reason. Doesn't mean that they failed, but they just for some reason didn't serve the membership anymore, and so they ended up converting or closing. We have a handful of these. We're still developing our database, so this is one of the analyses that we're going to do. Let me say, though, that the fact that most of the ones in our database, of course, it's really hard to find ones that closed, but not many have closed in Canada. There haven't been that many, and not many have closed. So out of the 188 that we have, we know there's maybe a dozen or 2 dozen that existed that don't exist anymore. And so we're still working this out. But my work in Italy found that they absolutely last much longer than conventional firms. That the critical moment tends to be in Italy, from what I found from, again, there was a similar database we developed in Italy of conversions. And what we found there is that in Italy, in Italian firms, SMEs, the crucial year for survival is year 2. If they can survive year 2 to 5, they'll survive. The crucial year for conversions is year 8. So at least the last 8 years. And if they survive up to 12 years, it's highly likely they'll survive to 30 years. And that was what we found in Italy. You can see that in the report that I linked to. This and other research from Scandinavian countries where they've looked at labor managed firms in the 80s and 90s suggests the same thing. So there is something to suggest that, one, taking over and converting a firm that already was in business, of course, it's not a startup from scratch, that tends to contribute to it. But what really contributes to it is the passion and the vision and the drive of the workers and the members. That is, in times of crisis, when the business is at risk, when the economic sector is at risk, what tends to happen, this is across all co-ops, but also conversions in particular, they don't tend to close. They'll tend to do other things. They'll tend to pay themselves less. They'll tend to kind of not pay patronage refunds, or they'll tend to do things that will sacrifices, personal sacrifices, in order to sustain the business. This is why in my work in Argentina, most of the firms haven't closed, and these started to emerge at the turn of the millennium with the crisis, with the financial crisis in Argentina. We find that most of those exist still in Argentina. There's about 400 of them, and they're even surviving the COVID crisis. So I think that answers partly that question. And so, yes, we need to do more conversions because these firms last longer is the gist. They tend to last longer than conventional firms. They also, think about it, the owners live in the community, so they're not likely to pick up and move shop somewhere else, right? These aren't multinationals that don't really care about local communities, right? They're entrenched in local communities. The members and the workers live in these communities. It's to the vested interest of the community for these firms to stay, and so they tend not to pick up and close. So that's developing analysis that we're working on. I think there's other questions, and I've jotted them down, and I'm going to directly see if I can find the folks that answer. There's an interesting question. We don't have time to answer this, and I don't know of a case in Canada of a public sector firm that converted to a cooperative. I know of a social housing initiative that converted to a cooperative here in Toronto. It's Atkinson Housing, but I don't know of a public sector firm that has converted to a cooperative, but they do exist in other parts of the world. So I'd be happy to, and I know this, and I'd be happy to talk to you about that. And there was a question from a colleague in the UK as well that that I'll answer hopefully on email, if I can find your email, or you just email me and ask me directly. I think we're out of time.
Thank you, Marcelo. So also for all the participants, you are going to have an email with the presentation and also the webinar, but also the panelist email. So if you have any question to ask, for example, to Marcelo, Fiona, or Jose, feel free to send them the email. So I would like to thank you. I would like to thank Marcelo, Fiona, and Jose, and also Mercedes for their time today. And we really hope that you enjoyed the webinar. And thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Merci.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Merci beaucoup, Mercedes.
Merci beaucoup.
Bye.
Bye-bye.